Hello and welcome to Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, where I discuss the future of this region, humongously blessed with hydrocarbon resources. Every week, we give some time to reflecting on topics relevant to the development of the Niger-Delta and her people. Now, this episode is no different. I'm here once again. We're focusing on how to take our region to a more promising future. This podcast is sponsored by the operator of the NNPC Renaissance Total Energies Ajib joint venture, Renaissance Africa Energy Company Limited, headquartered in Port Harcourt. Thank you for joining. I'm Adedayo Ilushakin. A topic in this episode: the future is inclusive. Now, today we join the global conversation marking the International Day of Democracy. The theme of this year is Achieving Gender Equality, Action by Action. Democracy is more than elections and institutions. It's about people. It's about participation, representation, and inclusion. Yet across the globe and here at home, democracy is under strain. Gender gaps persist in leadership, decision-making, and access to power. But change is happening, action by action, voice by voice. In this episode, we ask, what does an inclusive democracy look like? How are women, youths, and marginalized communities reshaping governance in Nigeria? And what can we all do to ensure that the future of democracy is truly inclusive? Let's dive in. Again, topic for this episode of Canvas is the future is inclusive. And my guest is Professor Kenneth Nweke. Professor Kenneth Nweke is a professor of politics and governance at the Ignatius Ajuru University of Education, Rumulumini, Port Harcourt. He served as a commissioner in the Rivers State Independent Electoral Commission here in Port Harcourt and is currently on leave of absence as the head University Relations for Renaissance Africa Energy Company Limited. Professor Kenneth Nweke, hello. Welcome once again to Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable.
Thank you, Dayo.
Now, I know you've featured on Canvas, the Canvas program, severally. We've been on for about 8 years now. But since the podcast commenced, I suppose this is your third time featuring on the podcast. Am I right?
Yeah, it is. I thought that.
It's always a pleasure having you here. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you.
And I know that as a professor of politics, a professor of governance, and I remember being also at some event or a place where you were having a conversation with some persons. I don't remember the details now, but I remember you talking about how you were passionate about young people, about getting young people to talk about the things that matter, about the things that shape their lives, and all of that. And so matters of such nature, I know you're very passionate about, and about governance, and about democracy as well, and about politics and all of that. So I have no doubts that since we're discussing democracy today, this is one that I envisage is going to be a truly interesting dialogue.
Yes, I do think so too.
Democracy. I've read, and especially when I was researching this conversation, this topic, preparing for it, I came across the phrase, democracy is under strain. And that's not just in Nigeria or Nigerian phenomena. The world over, democracy is said to be under strain or under some pressure. What does that mean generally when the expression is used, democracy is under strain, globally, and also in the Nigerian context? What does that imply?
Yeah, of course, democracy is under even, can say, bigger strain, globally, and more with us in Africa, and especially in Nigeria. And of course, when you talk about that, even in advanced democracies, with example, like the United States of America, that is a leading democracy across the globe. The democracy there is also under strain. That takes us to the book that Daniel Lipske, Daniel and his colleague wrote about titled "How Democracies Die," and it was an example of the United States democracy. And of course, the beginning of that book, the opening, gives you an insight about how the democracy we talk about, even in the United States of America, is undergoing some kind of pressures. It tells you, even when you say we have advanced democracies, because they have come to also go through some crucibles, so to say, in order to get to where they are. Of course, even where they are still going through a lot. Even under Trump, for instance, his first tenure, we saw a number of inactions, and then even, like you said, again, that democracy is beyond elections. It's about political participation. It's about inclusivity, and so many. And then when you talk about democracy, what it ought to be, of course, across the globe, like I said, including the United States of America and Africa, especially Nigeria, why do we say that the democracy is under some kind of strain? Because in living up to what an ideal democracy should be, down the way, a lot of rough edges, so to say, and the actors, are engrossed with so many things: political leadership, political followership, alike. And so, while political leadership, appears to be high-handed in terms of democratic principles, and the followership appears to be docile in even asking right questions, interrogating leadership in and over so many things, abnormalities. So when you talk about democracy under strain, you're looking at abnormalities. Where it could be in the area of judicial pronouncements that inhibit the development of democracy. Can be in the area of election management, that you have the electoral umpire that ought to be less rancorous in terms of his activities, ought to be impartial, and yet maybe the inactions suggest that it is not what it ought to be. How about the judiciary that ought to, when you have electoral disputes, and then certain pronouncements from the judiciary become even questionable. People begin to question certain judgments of the courts, including up to the Supreme Court and all that. And so and then it appears, even in the case of Nigeria, where judiciary now makes pronouncement even against all odds, where probably results that actually came out were no longer what the judiciary upheld, so to say. I mean, such controversies, bring the democracy we are talking about under strain, so to say, especially in Nigeria. And what I'm also saying here is that even the advanced democracies led by the United States of America is also, advanced democracies are not left out from this description, but it's even far better than what we have here, so to say.
So it is fundamentally, is democracy flawed? There are those who have posted an argument that democracy is inherently flawed. It's about participation, or at least it should be about participation. Well, you find that that is not what happens in many instances. There are those who have even argued in Africa or Nigeria, for example, a democracy does not suit us, and we should evolve something that is homegrown, a different system, if you will. Whatever that system might be, I don't even know right now. But what is something fundamentally wrong with democracy as a system of governance? Is it flawed?
Yeah,
and pardon me, the reason I'm asking that, if, as you say, some of societies or countries referred to as advanced democracies even have a strain on the democracy right now, and these are people who have preached democracy to the ends of the earth, and their democracies are suffering some strain, is it inherently flawed then? Is something wrong with democracy as a system?
Yeah, it wasn't meant to get flawed, so to say. It wasn't made to do so. But the operators, talking about political leadership, successive political leadership across nations, and the followership alike. Don't get me wrong, yeah, because whatever leadership does is in alignment with probably leadership, followership. And so for me, there's nothing fundamentally wrong about democracy, because the framers of democracy, think that, look, you need to give people equal opportunities. People should freely express their rights within the laws, no doubt. People's rights ought not to be infringed upon, and then the right to elect who governs them, the right to interrogate who governs them, the right for political participation, so to say, generally, not just the right to vote and be voted for. Because even asking right questions and all of those, interrogating leaders, at all levels, is part of democracy. And unfortunately, even while we say advanced democracies also have their own problems, these guys who wrote that book on how democracies die, talking about Daniel and co. In the opening, they were surprised that they were thinking about other developing nations, so to say, or developing democracies, looking at Africa, Asia, and some other areas. But they forgot that the leading power on democracy, being the United States of America, was also at the time undergoing some strain, so to say. And it was shocking to them that while a lot of studies were being done in Africa and other nations struggling with democracy, little did they know that even the United States of America was also passing through some strain, so to say, because of overwhelming influence of political leadership as espoused in the maybe the inactions of Donald Trump, for instance. And so we saw how judiciary was almost being manipulated also in the United States of America, in the first tenure, even second term, as it's running now. We're also seeing some judicial pronouncements coming. Sometimes you think that, these pronouncements will probably protect the interests of marginalized, so to say, those who are living in the United States of America illegally, but somehow they need to get protected and all of those. But you see some pronouncements coming and then not taking into consideration some level of inclusivity as far as democracy is concerned. And very harsh, And so then talking about Nigeria or Africa and particularly Nigeria, it was not meant to be flawed at all. Yeah, but our all kinds of environments and nature probably make it impossible for people to begin to see the good sides of democracy. Of course, because as it were, when you talk about democracy, institutions are liberal. Talking about liberal democracy where things are open and all that. And so some people take advantage of those to unleash, some kind of mayhem, I call, on the political followership. And so people begin to think about, democracy is not working for us, and probably we need to reinvent our kind of democracy or something like that.
Speaking of which, maybe democracy is not flawed then, which is what I sense you're saying. It's not flawed.
Not also mean that it has no challenges, because there's not, when you say it's flawed, it's like ab initio, it is meant to...
designed to fail.
To fail. No, it wasn't designed to fail. So it was meant to, work for the interest of everyone.
So maybe it's not flawed. Is it obsolete then?
Whether it's obsolete.
Is it obsolete?
No, it cannot be obsolete.
Is there something better? Can we move on to something better than democracy?
No, for Nigeria. For other countries, it's working well for them, but not without the strengths we are talking about. But as democracies go on, there's a need, for institutions to begin to work effectively to fine-tune, some rough edges, no doubt. But in the case of Nigeria here, sometimes people think, even in the last conference I attended in South Korea, in Seoul, precisely, in July. And so we got to a point where, some professors of African origin, that came to that conference from all over the world were concerned on the table to say, why is it that democracy is not working in Africa? And so we are trying to interrogate that and to come up with something. Probably, a friend, put it, say, probably we need a benevolent dictator or dictatorship, so to say. And unfortunately, in this part of the world, except you have what, we could call or suggest to mean or to be a benevolent dictatorship, so to say, where you have, of course, because the issues around democracy are so much, especially in Nigeria, where because people have freedom to express themselves, and then they also take advantage of that freedom and scuttle governance, for instance. But if you have somebody naturally that is good, that has probably a dictator, we are still working out that kind of government, that kind of system, that could befit Africa. But it may not be something that should work, by way of constitutionalism or constitutionality. But it may happen in such a manner that, probably a benevolent political leader emerges, and maybe not with gun, but with kind of suppression of the will of the people.
Just to be clear, are you advocating for a dictatorship situation rather than a democracy?
No.
Nigeria and
So
Africa?
but you see, that's the challenge here. I'm saying that we on that table, we were concerned, what should work better for us than the so-called democracy that we have today? And it was the table almost came to a conclusion that probably what Africa especially would need would have been a benevolent dictatorship.
Did the table in question decide that democracy is not good for Africa?
Yes, they came to the conclusion because they took a nosedive into democracies across, especially West Africa and other parts of Africa.
Should democracy then be jettisoned in Africa?
No, it shouldn't be jettisoned. But as we move on, because something is not working for us, for instance, I give you a typical example. You check up in other West African countries, you find those of them who came by some leaders, political leaders who just emerged by dictatorship. Okay? I don't want to, be particular here. So, and at the time, their citizens were hailing them to say, look, we need change. Are you get what I'm saying? And as opposed to the position of international community, especially because when you do anything to erode democracy, you are touching them so much. But yet, they also have their own challenges. And so, but the table concluded that it appears that the liberal democracy, okay, that we have in Africa is not working for us. But the issue that makes it not to work for us is not, it's not something that is not amenable to change. But it is about the people themselves. Because if people decide to make that democracy work, it will work. But our nature appears to, we have a nature of not able to challenge the status quo.
Can democracy work in Africa?
It can work if we want it to work, to be honest. Because you can't also trust this so-called benevolent dictatorship we are talking about here. Because when once there is dictatorship there, in whatever acronym you want to, whatever name you want to give it to, So when once the dictatorship is there, is in there, you say benevolent dictatorship, then there's still dictatorship. It means that the rights of the people are being taken off, right? In some ways. But if you look at our nature, we can always follow. And that's why in this part of the world, when somebody emerges as a political leader, every other person, leader, we are lawyer. And anything he does, nobody questions it. It's like that, even in our state here. Some people have become, some kind of gods to some people, politically speaking. And even in Nigeria. And so you see people, you worship them and all that. And so assuming without considering that those ones have turned themselves into some kind of benevolence, so to say. They are good leaders. They are not, naturally, they are not people who are engrossed in corrupt activities and all of those in order to acquire illegally and all that. If there are people who, live their lives in such a manner that they are not thinking about acquisition of properties, wealth here and there and power, and naturally they are good and they are ready to live under one small building, they are not interested in material things and all that, and that they are good naturally. So if they turn to become dictators where we even worship them, probably, they use the commonwealth for the people that the commonwealth is actually meant for. Then, if such persons emerge as dictators, because what is democracy? What's the essence of democracy? It should be any form of government at all. Should I have access to basic necessities of life? Should I have our lives protected? Should I be sure of my life? Should I live a secure life? Should I have the best form of welfare for me, my family, and all of those? So even if you use gun, you use gun to come to power. And then I have electricity in my house. The other day I was talking to you, you were struggling to go get, fuel, because there is no regular electricity where you live. And so should we, under normal circumstance, the other day I was also looking for, some fuel, when I heard there was an imminent strike, so that I could sustain, power supply in my house. And so under democracy, that should give us everything that we need, should we look for those things? So any form of government should be able to provide us with the basic necessities of life and then should make us live a secure life. And so if, you have any leader, whether it's a dictator or dictatorship, of course, that makes it possible for you to sleep with your two eyes closed, for you to have access to basic necessities of life. So what is life after all? And what is it all about? So democracy is a means to an end. And that end is getting the basic necessities of life and have a secure life. And so without it, without those, then democracy is worthless. Or any form of government, for that matter, is worthless.
Is gender parity in leadership essential for a functional democracy? And if it is, why?
When you talk about gender parity and all that, yeah? And for me, democracy is not about forcing people against their will. If you have positions, for instance, for Senate, and a woman thinks that she can muzzle all the things there, all the, in quotes, all the ruffle, like the likes of Natasha, in the Senate. How many women are ready to go through those in order to, fight for inclusivity and all of those? And so, gender thing is not something that is sacrosanct, that must, be observed in democracy. It's about the will of the people. So across all shades, including, across gender.
Would you agree that in democracies like ours, would you agree that there are marginalized groups?
Of course, naturally, there are marginalized groups, either in terms of, sex, female, male. There are marginalized groups in terms of age, those who are old, from those who are young people. It's marginalization also in terms of ethnic groupings. Are you know what I'm saying? So marginalization in terms of class. So there is marginalization in so many facets in society.
Would you advocate a parity for marginalized groups? For example, those who are ethnically marginalized. Would you be an advocate, or are you an advocate for parity when it comes to marginalized groups or groups who are marginalized ethnically?
Yeah, see, democracy is not any form of government, for that matter. It's not something that you sit and then you get it down where you sit. No. You have to struggle for it. Democracy is about competition. So whether you belong to one ethnic group or the other, whether you belong to one gender or the other, whether you belong to one, aged or the young people or the physically challenged and all that, you don't have to, even where you are physically challenged, you still stay where you are, and struggle for it. And say, I did here.
Then, however, if institutions that exist do not give room for parity or inclusivity, if I may use that term, how are these groupings, marginalized groupings that we agree are marginalized, how can they be a part of the system? For example, in Nigeria, we have, within the political parties, we have what's called zoning, when candidates are to emerge, to vie in elections for certain positions. So if whatever region, for example, is deemed not suitable or is not allowed to be a part of the process, how can they play a role? Because we don't have independent candidates in Nigeria at this time. So we must have political parties willing to, for example, zone to a region that may be seen or deemed marginalized for them to then take part in the process.
Of course, like I said, democracy is not because it's democracy and then you stay in your house and they knock and say, Dayo, come and take this because you're a man. Or Dayo, don't take this and leave it for the other woman who is sleeping, because you want inclusivity. Or Dayo, come and take this, or don't take this. No, it's competition. Yes, there may be deliberate policy by political parties understanding the dynamics of politics in a particular area or country to say, if you leave it, certain groups will continuously, suppress the others because they have certain disadvantages. And so it may be a deliberate policy or measure to say, can we zone? It's still about democracy. And I'm also sure that the voices of the minority, because democracy takes into consideration, the interests of the minorities. Okay? Yeah, but whether you're a minority or you're a majority, your voices must be heard. You need to push, If you're a minority, you continuously push because that's what democracy is all about. You don't also push, because democracy and whatever is about power, contestation for power. It's about, having access, to the decision making, where, allocation of resources, values. And so you don't sit down and I expect that. So you must push. If you're a minority, of course, you push. And then when political parties decide to say, look, we need to ensure that we have some level of inclusivity. We need more women in the National Assembly. And then sometimes they say, they come up with this, we give automatic ticket to every woman who is contesting, in our political party or certain areas. But they're also very mindful because there are certain things that, in terms of cultural, there are cultural boundaries too. There are cultural limitations, that also affect, women. But in modern times today, the issues around inclusivity, even in democracy, yes, like in Rivers State, you see at times for local governments, it's like, it's automatic that women must. And so why will you also say automatic women? It also limits certain women from also, vying for position of chairman of councils, for instance. So it is automatic that women will become running mates, when certain political parties decide. And so some ways it limits, some gender, like women, from even contesting the main position. And so they are reduced to spare tires. And so sometimes you ask how many women are chairman of councils and all of. So it may be deliberate policy by political parties, to tackle the issues around inclusivity, to say, we give this group opportunities, zone this, we allow more women to come from this and other. But all of those come when you say, I am here. If you don't say I'm here, nobody will know that you're there.
It is Converse Niger-Delta Roundtable brought to you by Renaissance in commemoration of International Day of Democracy. We're discussing the future is inclusivity. We'll go for a break. We'll return shortly. My guest, Professor Nweke, will still be here. Do please stay with us.
In the heart of our journey, where the sun touches the earth and the wind whispers through the trees, a new chapter unfolds. A chapter where energy illuminates more than just bulbs. It lights up minds. A chapter of unity, a coming together with a common goal to energize futures and illuminating lives. In classrooms, young dreams evolve, inspired by the promise of a brighter tomorrow fueled by available energy. Small businesses flourish, becoming seeds of prosperity. Energy that empowers and is catalyst for growth and change. The future is energy. So, let's light up the path to a sustainable future together. Energy for you, me, and the world at large. Energy for people and planet. We are Renaissance.
Welcome back to Converse Niger-Delta Roundtable, brought to you by Renaissance. I'm Dai. We're discussing the future is inclusive in commemoration of International Day of Democracy this year, September 15. My guest is Professor Kenneth Nweke. Prof, welcome again.
Thank you.
Is inclusivity necessary for democracy to work?
Yeah, I still want to say again and again, yes, inclusivity would mean that the system allows diverse groups, diverse interests, could be in the area across gender, across groups of all shades, to be given an opportunity, to be given for voices to be heard. So to say, that's what, for me, the simple way of describing inclusivity. And so when you talk about the future, being inclusive, the future of democracy being inclusive, of course, yes, when people say they are marginalized, they are not part and parcel of the government, of course, they speak out. And probably, like I said, there are certain cultural inhibitions, that make, it could be gender, it could be those who are physically challenged and all of those. But today, because, modern government all over the world allows for inclusivity in governance. And so a lot of people are speaking up. A lot of people are, making moves, and then recognitions are being, given to certain groups that feel, marginalized, so that they are part and parcel of government. But the point I'm making is that, yes, that pronouncement may be there, or that deliberate policy, that deliberate measure may be there, but it's not a must that it must be delivered to you when you don't make efforts to get, that inclusivity.
So what steps then can be taken by all concerned, be it government itself, because government plays a crucial role in running these institutions, be it the electoral body or other such institutions, communities, organizations, individuals, even marginalized groups themselves? What steps can they take to ensure larger inclusivity, if we agree that inclusivity makes democracy work better?
Yeah, it is something that continues to happen. It's not a one-off thing. And so many people who feel marginalized, who feel secluded, so to say, who feel that they're not part of the team, make efforts to become part and parcel of the ship, sailing, so to say. The ship of governance, ship of democracy. And so it's all left with people to make this a reality. Yes, government has a role to play. Of course, in terms of appointments, yes. It's not just about election. It could be in the area of appointments, because those ones are things that will not be by certain efforts or certain efforts in going through the electoral process and all of those. Probably some people who feel that they are disadvantaged may not be able to. But in terms of appointments, it's into the executive arm of government. When you talk about inclusivity, yeah, maybe those who are physically challenged, of course, become appointed. You see a physically challenged person manning a top government ministry in Abuja, for instance, the Minister of Interior, the Minister of Education, or Minister of Finance, Minister of Works and Housing, all those, big ministries. So what is wrong about it? It gives the people, those who feel marginalized, the hope that even the physically challenged can also hold exalted positions in the country, so to say. And so sometimes government, go out their ways to make these ones part and parcel, especially again, those associations, physically challenged and other, also push a great deal one way or the other to make sure that some of them are recognized. So it's part of inclusivity. And then women groups and all of them, also push to say, if we cannot be elected as senators, for instance, if you are not you don't have the muscles and all it takes, like the Natashas and all, to pull through, even when there's pushback here and there. And so you stick to appointments. There we have seen many women who have who have become so much in public domain, in the activities and all that, did well. The likes of Okonjo-Iweala, the late Dora and all that, Akinwumi. So a lot of them here that have proved, themselves. They were not elected, but they were appointed. So when you talk about the future, being inclusive and all that, I'm seeing it's not just about government. It's also about even communities. how do we give opportunities to those who have not been part and parcel of governance, even at the rural level, at the community level? Do we give them opportunities to also serve in the both? For instance, we have host community development, across in the Niger Delta, where some of these companies operate. So even in those ones, deliberately they want to say, oh, there must be certain positions reserved for women and all that. Those are deliberate measures to address inclusivity issues and all that in governance.
What role does the media play in shaping democratic culture?
Of course, democratic culture is key to survival of democracy, anywhere, anytime. And the media has a very big role in doing so. Even, for instance, what we are doing right now. And because what we are doing is going to be is being aired in the media. And so the media has a very big role to play in terms of the development of our, democratic culture, so to say. Because one threat to democracy in Africa, especially in Nigeria, is the issues around democratic culture. The culture of, Amigo ask, is a culture. It has become a pattern of life, a political life of the people. Docility, sitting on the fence. And that's why I like you mentioned, that I'm interested, I have the passion to raise, awareness of people across, especially the young ones, in taking up their, responsibilities, asking the right questions, interrogating their leaders, holding their leaders accountable, and all of those, and then becoming part and parcel of choosing who leads them, irrespective of whatever suppression that we have, we have experienced across, irrespective of state repressive, actions, on young people in asking the right questions. You saw in NSAS and bad governance, protests across Nigeria. And so, for me, the issues around inclusivity, the issues around getting things, they are just with us, for us to tackle. Even it is something that the media, for instance, has a very big role. And it also depends on the reportage, the messaging. And so, yes, as much as the media is important in shaping a democratic culture, in also helping to raise the awareness of our people, especially the young ones, in taking up their responsibilities in asking the right questions, choosing their leaders, asking the right questions, holding their leaders accountable, interrogating when they need to interrogate without sitting on the fence. And so who can do that? It's the media.
How is the media able to do this effectively, especially with some of the challenges that the media is facing, not just in Nigeria or Africa, even the world over, even in those places referred to as advanced democracies? You have issues like censorship. It's a very big deal right now, the world over. Even, and I can't overstress this, in advanced democracies. And you have censorship, you have repression and suppression of media houses. You have in some African countries, even media houses being shut down because some big man in government did not like what someone said, on a radio program or a TV show or something like that. How is the media able to carry out this role with all of this censorship going on?
Yeah, of course. If you shut down one, other ones, push further. There's no way you can shut down all the media. Even when social media, the Facebook and all of those shut in the country at some point, even the young ones started using other avenues to air their views. So while, yes, we know that censorship of the media is there, even when they do that, they do it in a coded manner, very coded manner. They can use NBC, to shut down. And they think that, NBC is part of the institutions of government. And then you didn't hear the political leaders do that. But NBC, in terms of regulatory roles that they are playing, and you're feeling their actions in actions, but not knowing that the actions are guided by political leaders. And so even when those come, even during the years of dictatorship in Nigeria, the media was still on there, fighting on. And that's what, I also have passion in doing, and which I think that even when I do my inaugural coming up on October 30th, that I'm doing some of those things I'm going to talk about the docility and why, we should be able to have a struggle sustained in such a manner that, the status quo must not remain. Even if it takes one person to continuously, take this message, take the action of raising the awareness of people, keeping the consciousness on top. Keeping the consciousness still running, and then taking up the challenge of continuously winning more souls for people. Then, if we don't do that, then we have said that, school dismiss, away.
Reforms are constantly ongoing in the electoral and even by extension the larger space democratic process in different parts of the world, in Africa, Nigeria as well. How do we ensure accountability and sustainability with these reforms, ongoing reforms?
How do we sustain?
How do we ensure accountability as far as the reform process is concerned? Reforms of our electoral processes and even democratic process by extension. As you rightly said at the start of this, democracy is not just about elections. So how do we ensure accountability and sustainability when these reforms are being carried out?
See, I also, there are a number of things when people study the issues around democracy. How do we need to fine-tune democracy to our systems of government to work for the interest of our people? And then they come up with, reform the electoral process, get judiciary working, get Dayo and Ken Nweke to do this. And again, a whole manner of, recommendations. And I say, this would not work when we have not addressed squarely, as Africans, as Nigerians, the issues around choosing our leaders or choosing leadership. We must get through, with this first. And then even when we get that, periodic checks on leadership to ensure that they are within the track. If we don't do that, and you're talking about accountability, talking about in terms of reforms, whether electoral reforms, judicial reforms, and all of those, those things will not work. So, but if we address the issues around, the rights of followership to elect their leaders, we can get that right. In 2015 precisely, when APC brought change mantra, and change mantra worked, because Nigerians were tired already what was happening at the time. And the same Nigerians that we see today, the same Nigerians that we saw in 2019 and 2023, the same Nigerians that are there, even if, yes, a lot of factors affect, their choice of what they do and what they don't do. But the same people removed the government of Jonathan by the transparency and the sanctity of the ballot box. It's the same people in 2023 that also almost removed the APC government, that's under when Tinubu contested the election. Because we saw the changes in the in the unit results across Nigeria. But unfortunately, what turned out later was something different from, and then we saw the issues around glitches and all that. And probably because Nigerians voted and then they were sure of the probably the unit results and they went back home. So one lesson learned. And then from the polling units to the coalition centers, a lot of things happened. Glitches and a lot. So that should be the lesson for Nigerians to learn even in 2027 and going forward. To say, you after voting and ensure that your votes count. Your votes must be, protected from the polling units to the coalition centers. Of course, when you do that up to local government coalition center, it will be difficult for anybody to manipulate the results at the state, level. So, without looking at reform electoral process, reform judiciary, reform this, when we get right, when we have the right to choose our leaders and we get it right, where leaders emerge by transparent processes, electoral processes, then we have started stage one. And when we get the right people into government, whether in the legislature or in the executive, then even judicial reforms, can work. Electoral reforms can work because we are getting the right people who will now make the right laws, who will now alter our laws to change because even going to the judiciary, they will tell you they're looking at the constitution, that's the ground norm. They're looking at other extant, laws of the acts of the National Assembly. So if you get the right people into government, of course, the right reforms that we reshape our democracy will begin to work.
What about the concerns of any individual regarding the nature of elections in Nigeria? The electoral body, INEC, announced results. These results were contested in court, and the courts upheld the results of those elections across the country and even at the federal level as well. But finally, as we wrap up this conversation, are you hopeful about the future of democracy in Nigeria? And if you are, assuming you are, what gives you that hope?
Yes, I'm very hopeful if only we can come out from where we are all, resting, sleeping. Not just resting, we're sleeping. But if you are resting, it means that you are okay, you're comfortable, and you just want to take a rest. But we're sleeping in Nigeria. But I see a lot of hope. And that hope is encapsulated in Marxism and Leninism. When you talk about class consciousness, Marx talks about class in itself and class for itself. And so that consciousness of realizing that where you are isn't where you ought to be over time as followership. And then not just realizing it, but having, some kind of dedicated group, just such as we are doing today, through the media and all of those, to continue to, educate the people, win more souls in realizing they are constitutionally given rules in deciding who governs them, such that on election day, in their polling units, they stick to the results up to coalition centers. Then we would be sure that the future of this democracy that we are looking at to be inclusive would be realized.
And now to wrap on this edition of Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable brought to you by Renaissance. The future is inclusive, a conversation centered on international democracy, September 15. Thanks to my guest, Professor of Politics and Governance at the Ignatius Juru University of Education, Professor Kenneth Nweke. Prof, many thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dai. And thank you, Nigerians, for listening.
And thank you for being a part of the conversation as well. Check out our social media handles on our YouTube page for other episodes as well, as fresh episodes come your way every week. I'm Dai Olushaki, and keep contributing your quota to a meaningful country and the growth of democracy in our nation. Thanks and bye for now.